guys, welcome back to Between Sessions. My name is Ebony Harris.
And I'm Elisa Wilkeen, and we are two brown chicks changing the face of therapy on both sides of the couch.
Welcome back. Thank you for joining us. Today we are going to continue our series on I Went to Therapy. Is this normal? And we're going to talk about one of our favorite topics, relationships. So today's topic is I went to therapy.
And now I'm getting divorced. Is that normal?
Is that normal? We don't have an answer to is that normal. I don't even have an answer to is that normal? Common, right? Because it depends is the real answer. Does that happen? Do people go to therapy and end up not being together? Definitely. Whether
absolutely
it's couples counseling or individual counseling does not guarantee that your relationship is going to work. I try to make sure everybody that calls me knows that. Like, my job is not to force this relationship to be together. That is not what I'm here for. But it is to help you understand what's healthy and what's not healthy, and what you and push you to do more for your relationship.
Right. Yep.
But that's it. I can't determine. I can't guarantee. I get a lot of people asking, what are the statistics? How many of your clients stay together? Da, 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 da. And I'm like, all right, slow down. Because staying together and success in therapy could be two very different things.
Yeah, I always say that all the time. You know, time together really doesn't mean anything, because what's the quality of that time together? I often use the example, you can serve a life sentence in prison. It doesn't mean that the time there was time well spent or satisfying, right? Like, so time alone and the length of the time means nothing. And I think what you're talking about, Ebony, is we don't have a horse in the race about whether or not you're going to stay together, right? Our job is to give you a really good process so that what you will gain from this is clarity about what you need to do for your situation, for your life, so that you can be your optimum full self. So
definitely,
sometimes it happens. People do go to therapy and they come back and they're like, I've outgrown this situation. So definitely happens.
It happens. So we're going to start with talking about just why. Like, why, if I went to therapy to help myself, if I went to therapy to help my relationship and my marriage, and this was supposed to be our last resort, which that's another thing, but this is supposed to be our last resort before we decided to end the relationship, then why would it not work? What would be the issue? Right. And I'm going to start with the last resort statement, because that's oftentimes what people do, which nothing wrong with it. Get the help when you feel like you need the help. But oftentimes so much has happened and there's so much history, and a little bit of it is sometimes it's just a checkbox. Sometimes this is just the thing we needed to do to say we tried before we went ahead and filed for divorce. So I think that's something to be aware of. If this is the last resort and it's not like we see it happening, so we want to get help before everything is blown up, or we see it, and we want to get to be proactive, and before we even started having big problems, we decided to see therapy. It's harder. And not to say it's impossible, because there are a lot of people that are on the brink of divorce that go to therapy and they end up staying together. But it's definitely harder once you've waited until, like, we're basically at the lawyer's office and they were like, we'll talk to a therapist first.
Right. Yeah. And that's because a lot of the times at that point, one or even both people are checked out, right? Like, one or more people are checked out of the relationship, and it's kind of what you said. I don't want to walk away from this feeling, or having people say, sometimes it's like having others say that I didn't try everything there is to do. So it's like, I went to therapy and it didn't work, right? And therapy works if you work the therapy. And a lot of the times, like you said, you're already at this point where you just don't have it in you anymore. Like, you're exhausted, you're drained from whatever's been happening. And so you don't bring sometimes, and it's common, like, we just don't have the bandwidth anymore at this point to do the work, because it is work. It is work. It's a lot of work. But and I think what happens with that is that, kind of what I said before, you go through this process and you get more clarity. Right. So this is what's happening. So why am I, like, now finding myself on the brink of divorce? It's because a lot of times you will have the clarity that you were seeking, and what you see now is the destructive patterns in the relationship. You may even see that, wait, so you telling me what I'm asking for is not out of this world, you know? So
Yeah.
I'm actually, what I'm asking for is what makes for a healthy relationship. So now you have more clarity about your situation and you can see it for what it is. And that may mean, oh, okay, I don't know that I can do this anymore, right? I don't
Yeah.
know. I've outgrown this situation.
Or I don't know if I'm willing to put in what's necessary to be healthier or to, you know, so that might be
Right.
part of it too, when you get the clarity of like, oh, this is how I contribute to this, or this is why
Mm-hmm.
this situation, and if I'm not ready to do the work to make it more healthy or to shift the dynamic, I mean, that's a reality that some people have to face. And sometimes, especially
Right.
when it has been a lot of damage, right, it's kind of like, I hear you saying that I need to do this, but I can't in this situation, right, because we've had so
Right.
much history and we've had so many things happen. So that
Mm-hmm.
clarity is a big piece, because it's one of those things we I feel like this has been said before, but once you can't unsee it, right? Once you kind of have the information,
Absolutely.
now that doesn't mean you can't continue to participate in it, but it's really hard to unsee it. It's really hard to not
Right.
be able to like be like, oh, okay, this is our dynamic, or oh, this is what you're doing and this is what I'm doing. Once it's been explored,
Mm-hmm.
once it's been talked about. And that's a reason why some people don't go to therapy too. So because they are scared of like, what am I going to see? And if sometimes that chaos is a little bit more comfortable than like, oh, this is how dysfunctional we are and what I have to now do something
Yeah.
about it. So
Yeah, and I think what you're also highlighting with the having the more clarity about like where we are, there's a level of grief that comes with that also, when you understand, and that you understand how you're contributing to it as well. But the whole, I can't unknow what I now know, because part of what therapy is meant for is to build your awareness. So the whole purpose in therapy is change, movement.
right.
And in order to have change, the first thing is to build that awareness.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, now I see what is happening and I can't unsee it. And that can be really scary. That can be really scary as well.
Definitely.
Mm-hmm.
So along with that is when you start to understand which goes with the clarity and the awareness, when you start to kind of see like, oh, this is what healthy is supposed to look like. When you're starting
Mm-hmm.
to really be able to, even what you said earlier about sometimes we ask for things in relationships and there are things that are kind of innate to us that we feel like,
Mm-hmm.
well, this shouldn't be that big of a deal, or I should be able to ask for this or expect this in my relationships. But then when you're talking to someone else, they might be like, no, that's stupid. Like, why would you want that? You know? And so it's
But then
very
it's not possible.
right. Like, no, I'm not going to do that. That's not realistic.
Right.
And so it makes you start to question like, okay, well, maybe I'm asking for too much, or maybe this thing
Yeah.
that feels like what I would need in a healthy relationship is unrealistic. And so going to a therapist that can say like, one, most of the time, whatever your needs are, as long as you're not asking someone to make you happy or to fix things in your life, whatever you want is what you
Mm-hmm.
want. Like that's,
Right.
but to go to
Right.
someone and them kind of help you understand what's healthy and what's not healthy and what's okay and what's not okay, it does bring this level of like, okay, so it's okay for me to ask for this, and the fact that you're choosing to not do it or whatever the case may be, while it's okay for you to do that as well, does that mean we're no longer compatible?
Right. And that's because a big part of therapy is also the psychoeducation.
Mm-hmm.
So you're learning, right? Like, so we're sharing
Yeah.
with you, like, this is what the science shows, not just some anecdotal, somebody has an opinion of what makes therapy work or what makes couples successful, but this is what the science of
Right.
love and healthy relationships says. And so when you start to learn, oh wait, so that's what makes a healthy relationship, and also kind of going back to that, and that's what I've been asking for, and it's possible. Because
Mm-hmm.
I think also what also influences us is our family history, right? Like our family of origin. Did we see what we want
Yeah.
modeled in our family, or even in the people in the couples around us, right? Like, so if you are around a lot of people who may have dysfunction in their relationships the feedback that you may get is what you want doesn't even exist. Like, that's not even possible. Men aren't like that. Women aren't like that. That's just
Yes.
how it is.
Yes.
Well, then you start to think, okay, then that's just how it is. And so then you go to therapy and they're like, that's just how it is in your world, but not in everybody's world.
Right.
So now you're like, oh, there's the possibility that I could actually have what I need and what I long for.
Yeah, definitely. I think what you said is amazing because you'll hear all of these messages of men do this, women do this, happy wife, happy life, women don't have sex after marriage, every man cheats, like all of that. And it's like, but so now that you kind of had these messages have now informed your beliefs about relationships, it does make you feel like, so I just have to kind of deal with this. Right. And this is just what it is. Go ahead.
Yeah, because nothing in your life is challenging that. You're not seeing it.
Right.
Like so it's just reinforced. Yeah. So yeah, big part of that. What I would say next is, if you've gone to individual therapy, a lot of the times what happens, well, not just individual, let's just say you go with your partner also, but you've been doing the work. You're doing the work, and your partner maybe is still in the space that they're in. And I don't say that in a way where, because I think where we have trouble sometimes when we go to therapy is now we kind of feel a little superior.
Right.
I'm doing the work. I'm self-aware, right? So we now have like this one-up attitude with the people in our lives. But I think, so when I say they're just not there, they're not there. So unless your partner is also willing to do their work, you're going to grow in a different direction. Mm-hmm. Right? The ideal is that you'd grow together in the same direction, but that doesn't always happen.
The same pace.
So, yeah, you might have it, maybe a little bit ahead of one another, but never too big of a distance. That's the ideal. Now, what can happen is if your partner is not doing the work to have a different relationship, then you're going to grow apart.
Yeah.
Or you are going to, one of you, and probably the person who is doing the work and is changing, you're going to have to suppress yourself. And that is where we were talking about earlier. You might stay in the relationship and be together for, 30 plus years, but you'll never really be your full self because you're holding back. And so that's also part of why people don't stay together, because unless your partner is, again, as interested and invested in change, you're not going to get the full benefits of that process.
Right. So what can people do? What do you do if you're going to therapy and it just feels like we are on the verge of divorce? That is just where we're headed. What are some things that they can do?
Well, the first thing, if you've gone to individual therapy, is see if your partner is invested and is willing to do some couples work with you, right? So now as a couple, you're learning to have a different process. And or if you've been doing couples therapy, maybe doing some individual work, right? Like, so each of you doing some individual work to kind of see. The toughest part about this is us recognizing how we are contributing to the state.
Yes. And I think with that is doing the work, recognizing where you contribute, not spending so much time focusing on how your partner contributes, because we do that a lot as well. But also is understanding that with this information that you have, can you accept that, like, okay, maybe we just aren't as compatible. And I don't like to use compatible that often, because I truly feel like when people start to focus on their own healing and focus on them doing, fulfilling their own needs, then while compatibility is important, it also is, we can just kind of like go through this world and enjoy each other more than, but I get that if you feel like we just have such different views about everything, and maybe we didn't talk about it, maybe we thought we were on the same page, but again, we've both grown in these separate ways. Like, is there that you need to be do you need to be working on the acceptance of the end of the marriage without it feeling like a failure? Because that is what happens a lot, is that when we hear the marriage is ending, we feel that we failed. And that's not true at all. It can be, it worked while it worked and now it just doesn't. So how can you accept the reality of what the relationship is at this point?
I like what you said, because I do think it's less about compatibility. Because every time I hear that, people say, well, we're not compatible, I always think of like people taking questionnaires and they don't answer the questions. Right. So I like to think a bit more of, are we in alignment? And are our core values in alignment? Because that's really what matters.
What it matters. Yeah.
What the science shows is you're not going to be on the same page for about 70% of topics, right? So it's those 30% that I like to think of. Those are the core values. Those are the non-negotiables that we have to be aligned with. Otherwise, the rest of the stuff, it just feels even that more taxing and draining. So part of what I often will tell, ask clients to think about, let's say you've done all this work, you feel like your partner's done this work, and speaking to that acceptance piece is asking yourself, what if this is as good as it gets? What if this is as good as it gets? Is that going to be enough for you to feel fully satisfied forever? For a lifetime? That's a very real question that we have to ask ourselves.
Right. And even with that, I'm just going to add really quickly, and are you satisfied with any area of your life? Because if you are a person that's never satisfied, then is it really the relationship, or is that something you need to work on individually? Okay. And then
that's a really good point.
Yeah. And then the last part is, have you given it enough time? A lot of times what we'll do is we'll start changing and our partner isn't on board at the same pace we're on. And they're like, okay, well, I can't be with you. And it's like, everybody has a different journey. Everyone has a different time frame with which they go through their journey. And so it may take some time, especially as you're changing and you're shifting. Maybe you're catching the concepts a little bit quicker. And then your partner isn't necessarily, because of whatever. It could be they're not as engaged. Maybe you're the only person in therapy. Maybe they have some blocks there from like previous relationships or childhood stuff. But there are different reasons why maybe they aren't getting it as fast as you. So are you giving it enough time for you to really see a shift and see the dynamic? And are you appreciating the changes that are happening? Because often we're looking for that 0 to 100, right? We want it to be, well, I'm here. Let's just jump right into the perfect relationship. And that's just not the reality of how relationships work at any point.
Right. Right. And we have to remind ourselves, you're in a different place right now. You've done a lot of processing. You've gone through a lot of work. And maybe your partner is interested in getting there. Like maybe they are really invested, but what you said, okay, you got to remember how much time you've been spending on your own work, and how long and what you went through to get to where you are right now. And it may be that your partner is just going to start that process. So it doesn't mean that they're not ever going to get there. It's just you've been thinking about this a lot longer. They're just getting started.
They're just getting there. So,
yep.
All right.
Yeah.
Yay. I hope that was helpful. Thank you guys so much for listening. We're going to continue the series and talk about more things that may happen when you go to therapy. So we will see y'all next week, or we'll be here for you to listen to us next week. I guess you won't. Anyways, check out Melanin. Check out melaninmentalhealth.com for previous podcasts. Also, and to find a dope therapist or dope merchandise. And also follow us across social media at Melanin and Mental Health and Melanin Health on Twitter. I'll talk to y'all later. Bye.
Bye.